The American Civil War decided the fate of the world as we know it. As the North won, the US reunited and industrialized, paving the way for it becoming a global superpower. But if the South would have won, America might still be divided today. From the war's outbreak, odds were against the South, having a much smaller population to raise an army from. But with hindsight, we can clearly see some of their biggest mistakes, that if done differently could have won them the war. Abandoning conventional warfare. Confederate military strategy was fundamentally flawed. They were fighting a conventional war against the North, but as they had a much lower population, less industry, and outdated infrastructure, the odds were against them. They should have used more guerrilla warfare, more tactical retreats, and more sabotage. Committing more to sabotaging Union supply lines and railroads may have lessened their technological advantage. Unconventional tactics would enable them to keep the men they needed by avoiding unnecessary battles. This could have kept the war going longer, and undermined the confidence Northerners had in their commanders. Encourage rebellion. The Confederates were rebelling against the federal government, but there was no reason they had to do so alone. They could have put more effort into encouraging other communities to rebel. Communities who took issue with how the government treated them, like native tribes or Mormon groups. At this point in history, the natives were still able to organize sizable rebellions, and tensions were high between Mormons and the government. Mormon beliefs require a fairly libertarian attitude, and they didn't like the government banning them from practicing polygamy. It might not have taken much to provoke a Mormon rebellion, and as their colonies reached across America's west, Union soldiers would need to stretch more thin, making them more vulnerable. Abolishing slavery. Now this might sound strange as the entire war was partly fought over the South maintaining slavery, but it was also fought over the question of succession. By giving up slavery, they might have at least been able to leave the Union. The genius of Abraham Lincoln was to rally the North behind abolitionism, giving them a moral crusade to believe in. One of the major advantages of this was the number of black soldiers the North was able to recruit. Around 10% of their army were black soldiers. Abolishing slavery surely would have reduced this, and maybe they could enlist more black soldiers themselves. Realistically, they never would have done this, but they could have. Seize or disrupt the railroad system. One of the biggest advantages of the Union is that they took control of America's railroads. This enabled them to quickly move large numbers of troops where they were needed. There were battles won by the North that they would not have won if they didn't control the railroads. The Confederates should have launched massive campaigns with the sole purpose of breaking the Union hold on railroads, but they didn't, and were subsequently not able to properly supply their armies, leaving Southern forces to wither away. It's one of the biggest reasons for their surrender in 1865. Not wasting soldiers in suicide missions. In 1862, Union soldiers were pushing towards Richmond, Virginia. Confederate commander Robert E. Lee was determined not to allow this. In a series of 6 battles over 7 days, he forced them into retreat by overwhelming them. It was a Confederate victory, but not a necessary one, and lost them 20,000 men they needed. Lee defied strategic convention by splitting up his forces, so that they could make coordinated attacks on the Northerners, but he provided them with no maps, so it took them several days to find their position. This gave Union soldiers time to set up artillery, meaning many more Confederates died than had to. They lost 20,000 soldiers they needed, as the South had a lower population and was already struggling to recruit. Reorganizing their command structure. During the war, Jefferson Davis served as president of the Confederacy. He had his strengths but also had a weakness for cronyism. Davis often appointed his close friends to top military positions even if they were not the best candidate for the job. This led to a number of military blunders that should have been avoided, robbing them of the constant victories they needed to halt Union advances. Many of his friends would later need to be removed from leadership positions, but by then the damage had been done. On the other hand, Union generals were appointed on account of their ability, so if they wanted to win, someone should have slapped Jefferson Davis and told him not to give jobs to his useless friends. surrendering specific territory. The South didn't want to lose any ground to Union troops, so they often wasted men and resources defending territory they didn't need. As their resources and manpower were in less supply than their enemies, they should have identified vital areas to defend at all costs, and let the Union occupy non-vital land. By failing to do this, Confederate forces were spread too thin to effectively defend against the greater numbers of the North. It left them trying to achieve more than they realistically could with only around 30% of America's population. By using politics, diplomacy often plays a big role in warfare, something the Confederates were not good at. Most slave states joined the Confederacy, but not all of them. 5 remained on the Union side during the war thanks to political incentive. These were Delaware, Kentucky, Maryland, Missouri, and West Virginia. These border states had massive support for Confederacy within them, but Lincoln was able to keep them on side by using politics, sometimes reorganizing local governments to prevent them from joining the South. Keep control of the Mississippi. The South needed this river for transportation of soldiers and supplies. They controlled it with a series of fortress cities along the river, but in 1863 the Union forced their last fort city to surrender, gaining absolute control of the Mississippi. This was a turning point in the war. From this moment it became almost impossible for them to win. It essentially cut the Confederacy in half. Without the river they were unable to supply troops to states west of it, like Arkansas. Only by keeping control of the Mississippi did the South stand a chance of victory. Had the commander of their last Mississippi stronghold not surrendered, the South may have been able to maintain control of her. That's why the commander, John Pemberton, came to be hated and called a traitor. Formed an alliance with Britain. Confederate Army commander Robert E. Lee took inspiration from George Washington, who his father was close friends with. Washington won the War of Independence by securing French intervention. With this in mind, Lee wanted to secure support from Europe. The South sent 2 envoys to Europe hoping to establish relations with Britain and France, but the envoys were captured by Union ships and taken prisoner. This didn't go down well in Europe, with Britain preparing to invade the Union from Canada and blockade its coast. Lincoln avoided this by releasing the envoys, who made it to Europe where they failed to enlist British support. Britain came so close to intervening. If the South could have secured this, it might have changed everything.